All right, everyone, so let's go ahead and actually work with these functions that we just talked about in the previous lesson. Again, my goal is to make sure you understand these. So let's go ahead and start with a basic function. So we're just gonna, call this basic. Just gonna comment it out as well, all right? So let's actually start with a basic function. We're gonna call this a greet function, all right? Greetings, or something like that. All right, so this is a basic function. Again, if you remember, this was the idea was that you just define whatever under it. For example, we can say print hello, and we can do whatever. We can say print how are you doing. All right, so that's the basic function. And if you actually run this, let's actually run this. We're gonna just call this function. Essentially, that's how you run a function, right? So if you run this, guess what's going to happen? We're going to just print hello and how are you doing, right? So we talked about this. That's a pretty simple concept. Now, the second, another function that we talked about in the previous lesson was the function which was the, a function with a parameter. So let's actually give this a parameter as if you remember, again, if you don't, make sure you go back to the previous video and look at the formatting or the syntax of the function. So we're just gonna call this name. So that would be our function parameter, right? So now we can actually use this within the code. So for example, I'm gonna turn this into an f string, okay? And we're just gonna call this hello name. Now, what is going to happen is that we can actually call this and use this. All right, so how are you doing? Let's use name again, and let's make sure that it is an f string. Okay, there you go. So now, take a look at this. If I actually, for example, well, this is our function, and if I actually call this function here, and let's say I put my name Sean, guess what's gonna happen? We're gonna actually print this with my name in it. So let's run this and take a look. Hello, Sean. How are you doing, Sean? See, guys, so what we did was we, defined a parameter for this function as well, and we used this in, in the code, and also when we called it, we used it and we run the entire code with our parameter. Now, again, you can do a lot of creative things with this, and this is something that we will do as well when we get to our practice, but it's just the basic, and we always use print for our basic. For example, you can actually, add numbers, all that stuff, you can use modulus, anything you want, right? So that's the idea. Now let's go ahead and do a more complicated function, and that is a function with multiple parameters. So we're going to call this name, and we're going to add another parameter, and you can add multiple parameters, by the way. You can add a lot of things here. You can add city, location, whatever you want, so again, that's just up to you, and we're going to just keep it up to 2. So we're going to have 2 parameters, name and city. And take a look. So let's actually make this something interesting. Hey, hello name, you live in, let's just make this you live in city. There we go. So just like that, we actually, we can actually define these and add these parameters, replace them with the text here with the print. So now let's actually make this even more interesting. I'm just gonna ask for some input. All right. So I'm just gonna call name, user name, input. Let's call this enter your name, and let's go give it a city, and I'm gonna call again input, and we're gonna ask for the city. All right, so now what we can do is when we actually call this, right, we can actually replace these values with what we receive from the user. So if, for example, if I want to replace the name here on the function with the username, what we do is when we call this, we're just gonna call username and user city. So what is going to happen is that when we call this function here, when we receive the information from the user and when we call this function, we're going to replace our variables with these function parameters, right? So that way we're going to call, we're going to put our values within these print functions. So if you run this, take a look. So we're going to, for example, I'm going to say Sean and Newport. All right, take a look. So it says, hello, Sean, you live in Newport. There you go. See, we just replaced it using, function parameters. And again, you can do a lot of creative stuff with this, but this is just the basics of this. Now, one more thing I'd like to talk about, which is very important, is that if you take a look, what is happening here is that we have these like function parameters, and when we run this, we actually run these in order. Okay, now because keep in mind that when you have a function with multiple parameters, you don't always want to run show every single parameter, right? So, or like what if you actually do this? What if we run it like this? So what do you think is going to happen? Because if you actually run these in back, in reverse, what we're going to do is that we're going to replace city with the name and name with the city. So it's going to all messed up. Take a look. So if I run this, and if again, I'm going to enter my name. All right. So if I put my name in city and take a look, what's going to happen? It's going to say, hello, Newport, you live in Sean. It doesn't make any sense, right? So the idea with this, my point is that this like function parameter runs in order, the order that it was defined when the function was defined in the first place. Now, if you want to change the order, all you got to do is to just make sure that you define the function parameter when you call the function. So if I say name equals username and city equals user city, now this is going to work the way it's supposed to. All right, so if I actually run this, and let's take a look and see what happens. Sean Newport, and take a look. Hello, Sean, you live in Newport. See, so now what we did here, we specifically defined and said, hey, this parameter city is this and name is this. So we specifically defined it. That way, when you run the function, when you call the function, it doesn't actually abide by the default rule, which is name first and city second. So that's another trick that you just want to remember, because if you see them like this, that's pretty much what it is. They're just being defined in not their actual order, which again doesn't matter, but it's just something to remember. But hey guys, that's pretty much it. This is how you work with functions, especially functions with inputs. Let me know if you have any questions about this. Again, it's a pretty simple concept, but I strongly recommend you to fork the file that I have, the resource file that I have for you in the resource section. It's a replit file. You can just fork it for yourself. And what you want to do is you definitely want to practice this. You want to practice creating some program, whatever that comes to your mind, really. Using these functions, functions, create an input for the functions, multiple input functions, and just like create something interesting with it. You can like add stuff together if you want, whatever you want, but just create something interesting and just like work with this, because I want you to get familiar with, because we're going to be heavily using this in the practice that is coming up. So just make sure that you're proficient with it as we go down through the section. So let me know if you have any questions. If not, I'll see you in the next lesson.